My name's Matt Nicoletti. Joining me today, we have Andy Bernal on the show. A lot of accolades to his name. First ever Australian to play in Spain. First ever Australian to play in England and Spain. First ever Australian to captain an English side, which was Reading. Former right-hand man of David Beckham in Madrid. Sports agent himself, and Canberra's very own Andy Bernal. Andy, thank you for joining me today, despite some technical issues.
Yeah, well, I think we've beaten them now. So, look, it's a pleasure to be on your show and talk about my career and football in general, where we're going in the world and from Canberra and Australia. But it's a great opportunity to discuss with you the project that I'm on now, the book launch, and things that I want to do with it. I want to translate it into Spanish. I want to turn it into a movie or a Netflix series because really it's a wonderful journey. It's good, bad, ugly. But if you're going to leave a legacy after football, it's one that touches upon mental health also. And I think, it's quite educational in many ways. It transcends just football, and it's something I'm very proud of.
Yep, and the book is Riding Shotgun. Very good book. I suggest you pick it up. Not just saying that, it is a terrific read, even for people who don't even watch football. They'll enjoy the story. Now, let's start off with, did you have a moment where you thought during your playing career, after your playing career, where you thought, I want to write a book, or did you just write something down? Was there a moment, or did it just sort of happen?
I was look, my football career was I wasn't the greatest socceroo, but I wasn't the worst socceroo. So in itself, it was a pioneering story, a journey, a trailblazing journey. And, we kind of led the way for the Vidukas, the Kills, the Cahills, et cetera. And so that in itself was a good story. But you kind of need, I think, a little bit more for a book. And the fact that I ended up, managing David Beckham, Tim Cahill, Tom Rogic, Carl Valeri from Canberra, kind of adds a lot of content, spice at times. And certainly, after my time with David in Spain, I knew that I had lived a movie. I had lived an incredible ride. That you could only describe as a combination of a James Bond movie, The Wolf of Wall Street, Jerry Maguire. I'm hanging out with the Galacticos at Real Madrid, the team of last century. At times so magnificent, but so unbelievable that it's words at times cannot do it justice. And look, I've tried my best. The story kind of writes itself. It's what I lived from the early days in Australia to the showbiz of Real Madrid, to scouting in South America for the Socceroos. It was a journey that needed to be told on many levels. But certainly, if it's going to leave anything when I pass, some kind of a legacy in terms of, giving the younger generations hope, resilience, and determination, and empowering them to go and chase their dreams.
So let's start from the beginning. Your parents immigrated from Spain, as did a lot of Europeans during that time, during the 60s. How influential were your parents on your life?
Majorly influential. They brought to Australia what a lot of immigrants brought. The hard work ethic. Times weren't great in Europe, and they came to what was supposed to be a promised land, and but they were prepared to work harder. And every immigrant has a story. They all have stories, and we all have stories. And I wrote this a little bit, with every immigrant, on my back, on my shoulder, because it was for them as well. And the things I went through, many out there can relate. And, maybe I don't know why, but my career, allowed me to play in magnificent stadiums throughout the world, to meet magnificent, famous people, iconic people. It just happened, and 1% away, from many people that football would not, without football, that I would never have met. But for some reason, it kept happening in my life. Whether I played against people, whether I then became, Beckham's manager in Madrid, whether my first football client as an agent, was Tim Cahill. What are the chances that the first one you sign is Tim Cahill? And he goes on to have such a successful career. So, it's, I don't know whether destiny was written above, but certainly my story is just another immigrant story. Well, not just. It's a pretty special one. So, what I've written, I hope people can relate to, and I hope it brings them, whether it's tears, joy, whatever, they come for the ride with.
And mentioning your parents there, your dad has some very interesting stories. You mentioned in the book how he came here, crocodile hunting, sugar canes. A lot of the Europeans came here, did worked in the sugar cane fields or the snowy mountains or stuff like that. One of the interesting stories I loved was him randomly meeting Leonardo DiCaprio in Battery Park in New York. Can you just explain that story quickly for the viewers?
He'd quickly gone down for a cigarette, and at the time, I think we're talking about 10, 12 years ago, something like that, he saw a bloke smoking an e-cigarette, and it was DiCaprio. He had no idea. Shouted out to the bloke, and I think an hour later they're sharing coffees and stories, and DiCaprio told him to go somewhere and talk to somebody, and the tobacconist, and he'd look after you. Tell him Leo sent you. And then Dad came back to my sisters in e-cigarette heaven, mate, and she said, Dad, do you know who you were talking to downstairs? You go, well, I don't have a clue. And she's Leonardo DiCaprio, and he said, who the F is Leonardo DiCaprio? And that was my dad. He wasn't your average cat. Leonardo would have picked up on that immediately. That's what top actors do. They look for characters. They look for people that have stories that go deep into souls. And Dad was like that. And he would have wooed DiCaprio, not even knowing that it was DiCaprio. And there you go. That was just one story of my dad's fascinating life. And then he and Mum brought fantastic DNA to the table, and stuff on a mind level and physiological level that allowed me to go and play on big stages and be around and represent some of the world's best sportsmen.
And growing up in Canberra back in that time, 60s, 70s, there's a lot of Europeans here, but that didn't come without the racial abuse, which you mentioned quite a bit in the book, and you mentioned it later on where you later on in the book, especially when you returned to Australia. What did that sort of shape you from your experiences? Did it sort of harden your character? What did those sort of moments sort of have an impact on you?
It as a kid, you're born in Australia. You want to be an Aussie, but every day you're not an Aussie. And I don't know if it was us, that we wouldn't take crap. We fought back. If you called us wogs, if you brought heat to our home, it went back. It came back to you, and it would come back with interest. Dad was like that, and I certainly was as well. And maybe that's why I kind of was around racism more, because we found trouble. It seemed to find us because we wouldn't just bow down to it. So we would fight back. And you know what? We ended up becoming, part of the fabric of society. We would go and watch all the sports, from motorsports, Charlie Speedway to the wrestling to rugby league to rugby union to cricket. We were involved with everything. We just wanted to be part of being Australian. So, but the kind of the pathway was a little bit set for me in terms of my uncle Luis played football here for the Spanish club, and most of the immigrants' kids, were tied to their clubs, of whatever country they had come of origin. The Italians, the Croatians, the Greeks, the Serbians, whatever, yes. And so that was the escape on the weekend for people that couldn't really speak a lot of English, and they would hang out at their local club after the weekend's football and speak in their language and have fun and drink, get pissed and whatever. And they were good times. And it was part of all that growing up, and, that environment that educates you, I think maybe in the right way to go on and become a winner in life. Whether it was, things that you listened to or that you heard, or examples of people becoming great builders, great footballers, great this, great that then you ingest and you put into your mind and you process and you think, well, this is what I want to do now. I wanted to be a rugby league star for Australia. I wanted to play rugby league, and I was better at rugby league than football. But, it kind of went towards the football way because of my uncle. And, I achieved, pretty decent things as well in football. But it was, I had no doubt, at say 15, 16, I would read the newspaper at the Spanish club. And people would walk past and, what's he doing? I'd be looking at the Spanish Liga 1 and 2, all the results, the tables. And, I knew I would play there. I'd tell people would say, what are you doing? I was, I'm looking at the tables in the Bernal Stadium, and I'm going to play there one day. And they were like, you know how many players there are in Spain? You know how many players there are in Spain? Impossible. What's he even thinking about? But I knew I would sit at Belconnen High School and look out the window, and I could almost smell the turf at Wembley, at Leeds United, at Manchester United, playing Arsenal. It was kind of like it was in my head, and these pictures would go around in my head, and I just knew I'd do it. And now when I manage kids and I train kids, and I suppose as I get older, the enormity of some of the games and places that I've played at kind of hits me home a little bit now. It hits harder with me because I just did it. And people kind of ask the formula, I just did it. There was no academies. It was my own academy. Find a wall, just played every sport, athletics, cricket, you name it. Rugby league, AFL, rugby union, fighting in the streets, whatever, hunting. We used to go hunting a lot, and just loved it. Just loved everything. And I really believe the more sports young kids play, now they're locked into a particular kind of sport and particular kind of technical kind of processes and plans. And, by playing every sport, you start understanding angles and spatial awareness changes and the angles of it. You need to ingest more knowledge, and you start understanding that, playing halfback or 5/8, like Thurston, is almost similar to Beckham. He gets the ball and he pings it wide, and he's looking for wingers, and you're looking for space in behind. Billy Slater, it's like a sweeper. As the tackle that I made on Van Egmond, that kind of led to a goal in the 91 grand final, where at Sydney Olympic we became Australian champions. It's really a cover tackle with Billy Slater, like bang, get it, and you run out, and no one had to tell me, open out, do this, do that. The brain just, we don't, that's the problem now. There's no imagination. I was down at the AOS watching the under-20 Socceroos warm up a couple of years ago, and I was confused. There's this football pitch, and there was flags on it everywhere, like 100 flags, 100 cones, 100 beacons, bibs, 50 new balls, 30 Socceroos, 30 young Socceroos, all dressed immaculately, all wearing $400 boots. And they were performing this warm-up drill like the seals and the dolphins at SeaWorld. But it was amazing. It was amazing to watch. It was like a military parade. And then the next day they play camera, they don't know what to do. You just really like, what do you do when you run into an elbow? They don't know what to do. What do you do when Sergio Ramos is up your ass? They don't know.
Well, we'll mention that soon, because I got a few questions about the AIS actually. But before we get there, in your journey, you played your juniors mostly at Bell South, and then you cracked into the Narrabundah senior team when you were about 14 or 15, I believe. People still, because you mentioned on the previous recording, but my dad also played in that team, and people still go up to him and say, "Oh, I saw that picture that Andy put up. People still say it's one of the best teams Narrabundah had." Can you talk a little bit about that, considering this is a Canberra-based show?
It's one of the greatest teams this nation has had. Don't worry about Canberra. In terms of an under-20 side, at the time, we were ACT champions, and we would have competed against any side in the country at the time, whether it was a South Melbourne, a Sydney team, a Marconi, Sydney Olympic, whoever. This was a team of kids made up of immigrants, kids, and some Italian like your father. Most of us were Spanish. And, my uncle was coach. He also played. I was the youngest. I was about 14, 15, and the rest of the boys were 18, 19. And, I was there by default, actually. I wanted to play for Belconnen under 20s, and I went to the trials, and I was only 14, 15 at Belconnen at the time. And the coach said, "No, you're not ready." He said that after I'd kicked ass all day, and I just thought, no, he's got his own team, he's got his own plan. So, you know what? But I wasn't going to leave his decision just like that. He said, "You're not ready for us," in front of, a whole squad. So in front of the whole squad, I said, "Listen, you know where to go. And my dad's in the car park, and he's going to tell you where to go. And you're going to watch me play on TV one day, and I'm going to make you look like a fool. And in the meantime, I'm going to go to Narrabundah and play where my uncle is, and we're going to come back, and I'm going to kick your ass this season, and we're going to do it once, twice, and then in finals. Remember me for life." And that's what we did. And that was an amazing time, an amazing team, surrounded by, again, an environment and messages that were just from an older generation from Spain that had seen Spanish football firsthand, that some had touched on playing there a little bit. And the messages were messages that I would later, hear when I went to Spain. The messages that I would hear at home. Messages that first and foremost, you needed to be a warrior. You needed to, like immigrants that came over, these were hard, steely people, resilient people that, worked hard. We work hard. If we have to kick people, we kick people. If we have to play, we play. We play with no fear. And it was a fantastic team. It was a fantastic set of kids. So it was not only one of the best under-20 teams Canberra has ever seen, probably the best under-20 team Canberra's ever seen at club level. We would have been in the top 3 easy in Australia. Again, I wasn't a starting 11 player. I was, 14, 15, under-20s, 19, 20-year-old guys. But for me, it was an education. I played a lot of minutes too, because, for me at 14, 15, 16, the first thing you got when Andy played in your side was, a warrior, of that ilk, the Puyols, the Ramoses, that was Andy, 20 years before. And So yeah, there you go. So we and that ran throughout the whole side. You know, it was the messages from the coaching staff, everybody. The first thing is, you need a pair of big balls to go out there, and that was it. I mean, your dad played in that side, and he'll tell you, it was, but there weren't too many limitations on anything. It was in go play like Spain, be brave, to the wingers, get past people, cross the ball. Football is pretty simple, complicated by people now in positions that need to make it complicated so they can justify themselves an existence and a living and an income. But it's the most basic game on the planet.
Well, that's actually a good transition to what I was going to ask next. You end up at the AIS with the likes of Ron Smith coaching you. You mentioned how important that was for you, and you're not the only one. There's so many players, so many of the great Socceroos that went through there 5 or 10 or 15 years later talked about how great that environment was for them at the AIS between Viduka, Bresciano, I think Aloisi was there as well. There's so many that went through there, and they all talked about how important the AIS was for them. How important was it for you? And then if you can touch upon your opinions on them getting rid of the AIS, I think it was like 3-4 years ago now, and where the Australian youth are left because of it.
Well, it was very important because I'd gone from Narrabundah to Canberra City, Canberra Arrows, I think at the time, and I played in their youth team in the National Soccer League. And, it was kind of where the best under 18s in the country went, and it was in Canberra, and kind of I didn't really have to make a big move as such. But people like Frank Farina and stuff like that were there, so Tony Franken. It was somewhere where you aimed as a young man, and it was somewhere that, they went to nationals and they picked the 3-4 best players, to come into the program. And I got selected, and Jimmy Shoulder was the head coach, and he had been an ex-pro for Sunderland and played cricket for Darlington, and ex-Socceroo coach. So he was the head coach. Ron was assistant. Ron Smith was his assistant. But again, we got information and we got educated by people that had been there, done that, that really understood and simplified the messages to us. And if you're told a certain thing 1, 2, 3 times, if you have to be told more than 3 times to do something, the game is not for you. If I tell you to mark someone this way, and after 3 times you don't register that, it's not for you. Join the public service, do something else. It really ain't for you. And we, they were pretty strong messages. We got great information, body positioning, everything. But we and we were told home truths about football. If you do this, this, and that, you have a chance. If your 20-meter sprint test is this, you'll never play top level. If it's this, you have a chance. If your VO2 max is this, you'll play that level max. If your VO2 max is that, you could go all the way. If it's this, for example, a very low score, you know what, you just got no chance. So we were given the truth. It's not given that much these days, but it's certainly, for me, the AIS was a platform, a stepping stone, and what it did allow me was the opportunity to travel overseas for the first time ever and play with the AIS in tournaments in Germany and Holland, where we would come up against Manchester United's, Liverpool's. We ended up in a final against Real Madrid at Borussia Dortmund Stadium, and their coach at the time was Vicente Del Bosque, one of the greatest ever. And as Ron Smith would say, I'm the first Australian to ever be identified by Real Madrid. He liked what he saw, but at that age, my knee was still okay. It was heading for not the greatest, next decade, but my knee was good at that time, and that's a pretty big accolade and pretty big honour. But I was of that ilk. I was of that standard. A lot of the years I've shied away from saying that, but if a gentleman like him identifies you, then there's something about you.
Before we move on, what the AIS obviously closed down 3-4 years ago, and a lot of the former Socceroos that have been there have talked about how they despise that decision from the FFA, or now the FA. How important was that to players, and what are players missing now from not having that platform? Just that professional platform is what they all said. They said it made them professionals.
Well, I think the age changed as well. So we were 17, 18. Over the last few years at the AIS, they were like 15, 16. So some of them went from the AIS towards the end, the final years now. They would graduate out of the AIS and they'd have to go to A-League clubs, for example, and go back into kind of youth teams. And it all became a little bit kind of dysfunctional there. Whereas we were 18, we would graduate from the AIS and we would either be picked up by European clubs or almost like a draft, almost like an Aussie draft. All the NSL teams would come in and say, I'll have Frank Farina, I'll have Andy Bernal, I'll have so-and-so. And that's how it worked. We were kind of going into a first-team environment everywhere. At 16, the last few years at the AIS just kind of, that was wrong, the age. But also, the last 3-4 years at the AIS, they were playing against local MPL teams here. When I was at the AIS, we played against Sydney Olympic, South Melbourne, all the top NSL clubs, which was the premier competition at the time, so equivalent to A-League now. And they would, when we played against them, they would bring down 5 or 6 of their first teamers to play. So you get better as a footballer by playing against quality opposition. So, you could have the AIS down here, the best facilities ever, the best coaches, the best 18 kids in the country. How are you going to test yourself? It's too easy. It's why in Europe, the breeding grounds, the environments are, you play in a Spanish, La Liga 1 or 2 team, and every weekend you're playing against, say you're under 14s Madrid, you're playing Atletico, you're playing Barcelona, you're playing Sporting Gijón, you're playing Albacete, you're playing Bilbao, you're playing Espanyol, you're playing Sevilla, you're playing Betis. It's at under 14s level. And that's what drives, the machine.
And you mentioned Spain there. You did end up moving to Spain, Sporting Gijón you signed for. You mentioned quite a bit in your third chapter about this, going there, not really sort of finding out the hard way what professional football was like back then when you were an international heading into a league that didn't have many foreign players. A lot of the leagues weren't allowed a lot of foreign players, which goes into your story later. Can you just explain a bit about your time in Spain and how hard you found it to assimilate before you prove yourself as a player?
Well, you go there, and I was captain of Australian under 20s at the time. You turn up, Gijón had signed me, and no respect, zero respect on a football level. 30, 35, 40 years ago, being Australian, they had images of these kangaroos here everywhere, and we just played rugby league, so there was no way an Aussie could play in Spain. It's just, and they still think that now. There is no respect for Australian footballers now. People like, for example, Kuhl, Cahill, and Viduka that have made it to a certain extent in England and become world figures. They're afforded the respect now, but only towards the end of their careers. But for young Australians now, nothing. It's hard to prove yourself, and you need to prove it in many ways. And for me, I was lucky. My parents were Spanish, but you're still looked upon as a foreigner. The rules were antiquated back then, so I had to be a foreigner because I'd already played for the Australian under-20s, which made it even more difficult. But the machine that is Spanish football, the machine that is Italian football, the machine that is English football, but in particular at the time, Spanish football, it thrives on destroying the weak minds. They purposely do it. Coaches, everybody, they just go out to destroy and eliminate footballers from a particular squad, so that they know if the one or two that are left over from the 20s that year that they haven't destroyed, they have the character, the fortitude, the mental kind of standing to be able to go and move into the first team and play in front of 100,000 people at the Bernal. That's how the machine works. And you quickly get used to it. You quickly understand that that's how it works, and you become part of that, and you do your best to survive. Living, for me, it was tough. There was no messenger services, there was no social media, Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, mobile phones, nothing. So, you put in a room, then you go training, you go back to that room, you rest, you're training, go back to that room, watch some Spanish TV on a fuzzy television that they have for you. If it's raining the next day, if it's, how do you speak to people? How do you know if training's on or off? You go 10 kilometres, and then you sometimes you got to walk to 10 kilometres because there's no bus that day up a mountain in Gijon, and there's no training. Or they might have told you there's training just to play around with your head, and so you go up there and no one's there. So it hardens the soul. But my childhood, growing up in Canberra, the racism, the whole thing, my family's genetics, I adapted to it, and I quickly understood. So this is the way of the world here. Okay, I'll play that game. So, and we all kind of endear ourselves to coaches, to football clubs in many ways. We all can't be Messi, Maradona, Ronaldo in terms of technical ability, skills, all that sort of stuff. For me, it was, like Ramos. I'm going to kick the shit out of you. I'm going to play. I can play. And eventually I went out on loan. It's hard. At Gijon, I couldn't. I was 18. I had 5 Spanish internationals, and I was never going to play that first 11 for a while. So they loaned you out. And my coach at Albacete was Pachin, and he played for Real Madrid, just 2-3 European championships, and then he played in the great side of with Di Stefano, Puskas, Gento. And he said, "Son, here's some basic instructions that I'm going to give you. It's what I did, and your job is to eliminate the number 10. I don't care how you do it. I don't want any excuses. You eliminate him, kick the shit out of him, you win the ball, and you give it to players that are better footballers than you. And if you do that, you'll play for your national team, and you play 400 or 500 games around the world." Pretty simple instructions. There was, warm-ups were simple. He would have looked, I'm telling you, he played for Real Madrid, 500 games and Spain. He would have looked at that warm-up that the young Socceroos did at the end, and he was going, I'm confused too. And so it's different times, but look, it is what it is. It was what it was, the communication, the social media, the whole lot. I can look on it now and understand why things have happened in my life, how mentally you were impacted later on in life. At the time, no social media was normal. That was normality. So you worked your way around it. Now, if you told a kid, I'm going to send you to Spain and give me your phone, and you're going to talk to mum and dad for 6 months, you maybe collect calls through an operator. Give me everything. Give me your laptop, your everything. You can't have anything. All you've got is a pen, a bit of paper, and a room and a bed. Try that.
It definitely was a different time back then. And interesting how you mentioned how Australians sort of gained zero respect, especially in those sort of countries like Spain and Italy. I did remember reading Grella and Bresciano's stories, and they said it was the exact same thing, despite the fact they had Italian ties like you with your Spanish ties. That didn't matter to them. They just had to sort of prove themselves, and then they ended up having 10+ year careers doing well for Socceroos and Italy as well. But it's never easy, especially before the 2010s.
Yeah.
100%. And you ended up fleeing Spain because they wouldn't let you play for the Spanish national team. You mentioned how antiquated the rules were, and you ended up going to England because they wanted you to do military service, but they wouldn't let you play for the team. So what was that sort of process like for you, sort of leaving the country as soon as you could to, avoid
Well, it's just
unwanted military service, really?
It was just a principle situation.
Yeah.
FIFA, had these rules then, and only 2 foreigners were allowed. And I played for the Australian under-20s, and despite having a Spanish passport, I was ruled I would be a foreigner in Spanish football. Having a Spanish passport is incredible. So, it meant that it would be very difficult, to as a defender, to stay in Spain. They look for number 9s and 10s as their foreign players, 2 per team. So really, the 2 years that I played in Spain, I played as a foreigner and as a defender, which, the facts of that are that, that would put you in the top 40, 50, 60 players in the world to occupy a foreigner spot in Spain. But I was of that level at the time. But it is what it is, and I was not going to go to war prepared to go to war for a country that wouldn't allow me to play football as a Spaniard. So Dad and I escaped. Well, I escaped, and we got to the airport and left, and see you later. Military police arrived weeks later at my grandmother's, and by then I was gone. And look, years later, we fixed everything up with the Spanish embassy here in Canberra. But certainly, if I'd been caught on the way out, I would have been in a military prison for 2 years. But I wasn't, and I hit London and got in with a visa that was supposed to be for part-time work. But they didn't really have any markings those days. I'd already studied it out. I worked that out about 4 or 5 years ago. I'd prepared for this day. And so I could get a visa stamped in, and then the FA would look at it, the clubs would look at it and go, hey, working visa, bang. It didn't say for part-time work or anything like that. And that's how I got into England. And, eventually it would be my downfall. It's kind of weird because the Spanish passport that I acquired that made me leave Spain was my re-entry many, many years later when I signed for Reading. So under a Euro passport. So there you go.
You went straight from Spain to Nottingham. You mentioned in your book how if someone like Paquin can endorse me and Del Bosque can endorse me, then I'm not going to have any sort of fear in going up to the one and only Brian Clough and asking him for a trial. What was it like being trained by arguably one of the greatest coaches ever in football?
Just very, very blessed to have been around, again, like you said, arguably the greatest, British football manager in history. There's a few others around, but certainly he's up there, and he would tell you himself he was the best and first. Just a mad genius. He taught me that managing football clubs has got nothing to do with football. He told me that on many occasions, son, it has nothing to do with football. And he's right. Anyone that thinks managing top football clubs is about football, it's mindset, the whole thing. It's making men want to go to war with you, believing in what kind of plan and a journey you have for them. And once you get people believing into that, he took a team that was, I wouldn't say mediocre, but they were a decent first division team, and they won 2 European championships. And he produced many, many wonderful internationals, but he was different. He just wanted to talk cricket with me.
Yeah.
Yeah. There you go, just cricket. He loved cricket. He'd ask me about West Indies and had I seen Desmond Haynes and Viv Richards, and Gordon Greenwich, and I loved cricket. So from minute one, we were kind of like, he embraced me, and he said, He said, I had another Aussie here. He was talking about Alan Davidson, and Davo, I suppose Davo and myself are the only Socceroos ever to be signed by Brian Clough. So, in a way, there's an accolade, there's an achievement. If that man, rubber stamps your signing or values you, what he sees in you as a footballer, it's not bad, huh?
It is certainly impressive in that regard. And you end up playing for Ipswich Town, then you end up coming back to Australia. You mentioned before why you need to come back to Australia. You ended up playing NSL, Sydney Olympic. You described it in your book as you felt like it was a bit of a failure considering you were playing some of the best football just previously before needing to play in the NSL. Can you just describe that a little bit before we head on to the Reading part?
Just never really wanted to play in Australia. It's not even being disrespectful towards the NSL or whatever. It was, I was a kid with a dream and I wanted to play on big stages. If you're a baseballer, you want to play Yankee Stadium. You want to play for the Yankees. If you football, you want to play in Spain. You want to play in England against all the big clubs, for the big clubs. So for me, coming back, it felt like I'd failed, but it wasn't. It was a different. It felt like I failed, but it wasn't so much failing on a technical level or on a football level. It was I was really denied 500 games in Europe because of the red tape, bureaucracy that was just, I'd been offered a contract for 3 years at Ipswich Town. They were a big team then, big team, and I just broken into the first team, and I get stopped at customs and I get sent home. The guy puts a stamp in my passport and he says, "You're never coming back here ever, mate." Oh, well, he was wrong there, wasn't he? But it kind of, it impacts you because you're then back in Australia and you're seeing guys playing in league matches and on the big match, FA Cups, and they're playing in a team and they're playing in that team because you weren't able to, because you were denied a visa. No jealousy part this and that. I was angry at the bureaucracy of it. And then you get back to Australia and then part-time football, you've got to search, you've got to be in Sydney or wherever and you're looking for other jobs. And then, the things I did, you try acting, I became a ranger at Wallara Council. I'm chasing dogs at Watson's Bay. Part-time dog catcher when the dog catcher was away under the ranger services. So the multitude of things that you do, that you adjust to, that you take on, lends for a weird and wonderful story and journey. And in the middle of that, when I probably wasn't as good a footballer as I was in Spain, 1920, I get a Socceroo cap, in a part-time environment with a job on the side, and a mind that I still, when I never cheated the game of football. When I played or when I trained, I gave 1,000,000%, but the environment allowed you to cheat yourself sometimes here in a part-time environment. And so for me, it just, again, I believe I was a better player. Those 3 years, 19, 20, 21, 2 years in Spain and the bit in England, that's when I should have been capped, but I wasn't. And, it happened when I was playing less of, at a lesser level than I was born to play at. And by then I'd probably had 100 holes drilled into my knee. It was bone on bone. By 21, 22, to be honest with you, I'd bone on bone. Meniscus was gone. And the articular cartilage on the bones of the left knee were already starting to wear away. So, surgeons for many years would say, it defies medical science what you do. And I kind of liken it to you get a ride, you get a drive with a Formula One team. And, by 21, you've gone through all the karts, you've done everything, and then you get a ride in Formula One. And then the mechanics, the team boss comes up and says, you're in this McLaren for the next 5-10 years, but the left-hand side of the car will have no brakes and no suspension.
Despite that, you still ended up going back to England and playing for Reading, captaining Reading to 5 or 6 years or so to end your career. Did you at least feel sort of validated that you're able to at least make it back and end your career in that way?
Well, that's kind of, that was something that would have haunted me for life if I'd been denied all those years of playing, 6, 7, 8, 9 years of my best years, unable to play in England or Spain because of red tape. And so the opportunity to go back, even on one leg, I would never have passed a medical, an MRI scan. And it was insanity. I went to see the doctor, and he tapped my knee with a rubber hammer, and he said, "Is that okay, son?" I said, "Yep." He goes, "You're right." Yeah, he goes, "You're right. No MRI. I would never have passed a medical today."
Medical, yeah.
And I just played 6.5 years, and lived a dream that I knew I could play out when I was a kid, and that I dreamed of when I was a kid. Playing against Leeds at Elland Road, beating them. Manchester United in FA Cup ties, against Chelsea, against and sometimes we all win different things, and some have more caps, some have less caps. I suppose the greatest accolade I've kind of maybe received, I've told a few people, playing against Chelsea. Marcel Desailly, AC Milan legend, Dutch legend. French, played for France. And AC Milan, he was a legend defender, midfielder. He was playing that day, and Zola was up front, Vialli, people like that. And after the game against Chelsea, Zola and Desailly came up to me and said, "You should have been with us today." So, that, I suppose, football accolades, from people that are players, also legends, it doesn't come much bigger than that, and I suppose we all get out of the game what we get out of, but for me, they were some special words.
100%. They definitely sound like special words. And after you finish your career, you get an opportunity to talk to one of the bosses at SFX, and you end up getting employed under that agency. And to prove yourself, you end up recruiting Tim Cahill. Was it in less than 24 hours? Is that what it said in the book?
Yeah, I think it was. Tony was David Beckham's agent, but he created a company that had Gary Lineker, David Platt, Beckham, Owen, Gerrard, Dwight York, you name it. Everybody was in that office. The office, of the same company in the United States had Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant. So it was a pretty the number one sports management company on the planet at the time. I got that job, and I think Tony's test was, we need to get Cahill. We can't get him. I can't get him. Our young agents in the office can't get him. Whatever we try and do, we can't get him. And so give you 3 months, and so 24 hours later, I had Tim in the office, and he became a client, and I was part of the deal that took him to Everton, and we're still in touch these days. And I'm very close to Tim and his family.
And of course, he ended up going on to have a terrific career, one of the best Socceroos, you would say?
The best. And people have different opinions. What do we mean by, what do I mean by best? What do we, individuals, we all have opinions.
Yeah.
For me, he's the greatest Socceroo in terms of the impact and when he impacted the game for the national team. The first goal for an Aussie at a World Cup, at an Asian Cup, his goal scoring record. In the book, the stats are there, but it's of Ronaldo quality, of Shearer quality at international level, and from a position where he's an attacking midfielder, not a striker. His goal stats are unbelievable. The goal, the volley against Holland in the World Cup. As good as Kuhl and Viduka were, and they're fantastic players in their own right. wonderful players. Played for the biggest teams in England at the time, and but on an international stage, I think Tim was equally as good and better, and his stats will tell you that. And Kuehl and Viduka played for Leeds when they were top of the pops in England. Timmy played for Everton. Timmy's impact at Everton was almost like Maradona's impact at Napoli. Timmy took Everton that were mid-table, and they were always fifth, sixth, and he's scoring, bicycle kicks at Stamford Bridge against Chelsea and stuff. So for me, I might be a little biased because he was my first client, but I would put his stats down with any other Socceroo, and they don't compare. It's as simple as that.
And I just want to get your thoughts quickly on the way agents sort of have taken over the game at the moment. You've got, it's just an example, but you got Donnarumma's agent, Mino Raiola, is one of the main ones at the moment, and he's about to leave Milan. He's a great example. Let's just say he goes to Juventus, right? He's not going to be going to Juventus because Juventus are going to be paying him more salary than like Barcelona or whatever. That's because Juventus will be paying Mino Raiola more of an agent's fee than any other club would. So what do you think about how sort of agents have become so even more, influential in players' moves? I know it's always their own move at the end of the day, but you seem to hear these stories a lot, and you wouldn't hear these stories that often if there wasn't at least a little bit of truth in it. Look,
I think there's some powerful agents out there. I've met them. Of all those guys that you mentioned, Ronaldo's agent Mendes and that. These were guys on the circuit. Part of it, when I was kind of around there, some of the young punks, they were coming through it, and they're unscrupulous. There's no morals at that level. The agent business is you find the most horrible human characters and traits that you can ever imagine. That's why I kind of stick clear of it. If I find a kid in Canberra or something that I kind of am friends with, and I think he can go somewhere, we manage him as almost on a family type level. But do they have power? Yeah, of course they have power. They control SFX. When I was in England, if you control 75% of the players in the EPL, yep, you have power. Raiola, Mendes, all these guys. I would say, to answer your question, as to someone would go to Juventus or Barcelona because the agent's getting more money. There may have been those cases, but in most cases, the agency fees are pretty similar. The wages would be similar, going to Barcelona or Juventus, and the agency fee wouldn't vary much either. Raiola could quite easily say, well, I think that's a better suit, a better fit for you, a better this, a better that. Ultimately, I think it's what the player's going to get, and if he's happy with that, trust me, at those levels, the agent will be rewarded. But I've seen cases where, with Beckham, this is what you're going to get at Madrid. This is what you're going to get at AC Milan. This is what you're going to get at Barcelona. And, the agency fees are not too dissimilar at times. And ultimately, like Beckham, he had Real Madrid on the mind. And he was going nowhere else. The agency fees, one might pay whatever, a bit more than the other. But they work more on terms of, for example, if you take a kid to, say, AC Milan, or say Inter Milan, the director of sport would say, Andy, bring him here. We're going to give him this much, this much, this much, and we'll give you this much. But the next good kid you have, you bring him here as well.
So they're essentially like workers for the club now.
Yeah. So kind of agents kind of become linked and friendly, with a particular club. There'll be agents like the ones you've spoken about that, you'll see for a period of 4, 5, 6 years, a lot of their players go to a particular club because they're getting looked after, not so much on one particular hit of an agency fee, but it's like, you bring him here, is $1 million agency fee. And I want him and him and him that you also have, you bring them in next year. So the agent's going like, whoa, it's fantastic. It's just Inter are going to take all the boys.
Yeah.
And it's
exactly.
one after the other. And that's how it works. So it's, you know what? I think it's ridiculous, the agent fees in football, but it is what it is. It's, if you're lucky enough, or you work hard enough, or you find yourself looking after one of those great players, you can get yourself $10-20 million in a bank account in 24 hours. If that's where the player wants to go, that's the lunacy of it all. But it's the same with basketball in America and stuff. It's, madness.
Now you've just had the meet with SFX. Now you spend a year traveling around Spain and Italy preparing for Beckham's moves, and now you are off to Madrid as his right-hand man. Start of that chapter, I think you say, little did I know what I was going to expect when you go there. Immediately, paparazzi everywhere chasing you around.